Hello, hello, magic makers. Kelsey Foremost here, your host of Find Your Magic. Welcome back. Today's episode, I'm so excited about because we really dive into how to approach your projects, your creative projects, or your entrepreneur endeavors with a sense of play, with a sense of childlike wonder. And one of the ways to do that is to find a creative outlet that is just for joy, not putting pressure on making money on every single hobby or every single side project that you do. And that those side projects or those creative outlets pour into our cup and are just as important as the work that we put out in the world that is bringing us financial abundance. I am so excited to be having this conversation with one of my favorite humans on the planet, Mr. Gentry White. Gentry is a successful actor in Los Angeles. You have probably seen him on one of the many shows he's done, like the Shannara Chronicles, Unreal, Washington Spies. Most recently, he was in Jett on HBOMax. He's super talented. He's super successful, but he also has done a really good job balancing what creativity he brings to set to his work, but also making sure that he has a creative outlet outside of work so that he can continue to approach creativity with that sense of play and childlike wonder, which is just so admirable. And we also talked a little bit about vulnerability in our work, because as a creative person, a lot of times we are asked to be very open and be very vulnerable. And it's hard sometimes not to close ourselves off from that feeling of vulnerability. But if you can be open, you actually might have some of the best, most lucrative, most wonderful connections, even some friendships in your work if you show up as your full, authentic self. Finally, Gentry and I touch on a subject that I think is so important to continue to speak up about, and that is Black representation in the media and in entertainment. Gentry was so generous in sharing some of his thoughts on the subject, really opened my eyes and my heart and mind in new ways. And I am so excited for you to hear this amazing conversation. So without further ado, here is my friend, Gentry White. All right, now to the star of the show, Mr. Ian Gentry Cameron White III. All of the names, yes. Hyphenated. You guys, Gentry is, first of all, when he's one of my favorite people on the planet, but he's also a very fancy actor these days. He's on a show called Jett on HBOMax. Ooh, and he's been in all kinds of fancy stuff like Fast and Furious and Unreal and Shannara Chronicles and Washington Spies. But I want to take it all the way back.
Way back.
A little show called The Fantastics.
The Fantastics.
Gentry, you want to tell people what The Fantastics were, please?
The Fantastics, man. The Fantastics was such a great concept. I'll start there. The concept was so good. It basically was a show. It was a web series that you and I did where it was the behind the scenes look at what it took to make a children's television show. And I always thought that the concept was so cool because it was an adult web series, but it had so much like childlike things going on because we were like, if you know the Wiggles or I don't know what other kid shows that have
just
hosts
like
and stuff.
Disney, it just reminded me so much of like watching the MMC Mickey Mouse Club, like those like, you know, adult people who are put in a situation where they're like singing and dancing high energy, like kids songs.
Bright colors. Like we all had our color that we would wear and stuff.
What was your color?
Solid. I think mine was like yellow.
I think yours was yellow.
Yeah, I think it was yellow.
And I was pink, of course.
Yeah, pink. And then there was green and blue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so Yeah, and so it was a cool concept, and it was one that I felt like if it was on HBO, it would have been a really cool show because it was
Yes.
like, these are adult people, and you never think
With
about like
adult problems, by the way. And the
very
reason I want to
real.
bring up Fantastics is actually because it dealt with some very real mental health issues.
Yeah, yeah, and I thought that the concept was a really good um and funny like way to like look at what it takes to make like a TV show, number one, but a kids show with
Mm-hmm.
adults who are entertaining children. But I was like,
Mm-hmm.
but these are adult people. So I think as a kid, when you're watching like a kids TV show, obviously you're not thinking about the fact that these people may have their own kids. Like these people might be sleeping together. These people might have
Mm-hmm.
like drug addictions. They might
Mm-hmm.
be a bit of, maybe a bit of a pedophile, or they might like really young girls or boys kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe legal ages, but still young,
Yeah.
young for how old they were, kind of thing. So it was a really interesting concept to just see like how they interact with their agents and all this kind of stuff. And so,
And
yeah.
also, one of the coolest parts for me of that show, of the scripts, were thinking about, but these are actually actors who have landed the quote unquote Holy Grail of acting, which is
Hmm.
a series regular job, meaning you're getting paid to show up over and over again to be a star on a television show. And at what point does it not become okay anymore? Like,
Yeah.
at what point do you sacrifice the paycheck to go back to what got you into your art in the first place? And maybe you don't have
Yeah.
to. Maybe you're cool, like taking that paycheck and you're like, this is what I'm really good at and this is what I'm going to do. But recognizing that line of like, this isn't worth it anymore, I think was
Yeah.
a really interesting concept of that show.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really felt like the show definitely could have had like better legs than it did, but especially at the time in which you and I met doing
Mm-hmm.
that, it was like what, 7 8
Oh my
years ago
gosh,
now.
I don't even know what year that was. I mean, it must
Like
have been like 2013 or 14
yeah, I mean, I
because it was
think
right when I got to LA.
yeah, and I was like, I hadn't done anything at that point, and so that was like a kind of a big deal, and I was hoping it was going to be, at the time, anytime you do a short film or a web series, you're hoping it's going to be so much more than just that, and like somebody will see it, and it'll get picked up, and then they'll
You never
recast
know.
all of
I
us,
mean, hey, look at
true.
Two
Short
Dope
term
Queens
12.
or yeah.
Yeah, like Brie Larson, like she was in the movie version of the short film version of Short Term 12 that got her to really start getting the ball rolling in her
You
career.
never
So
freaking know.
you really never know. And I do think that show had like a lot of potential to be something. I just think that at the time we weren't where we're at today with like technology and like pushing certain stories like that forward and being in
Mm-hmm.
the right circles and stuff. Now I think it could actually, I still really believe in the concept.
I do
I would
too,
actually watch it whether or not I was on it or not. I
for
think it would be a
sure.
really fun like adult show to check out and stuff.
For
So
sure.
that is how we met.
That is how we met. And it brings me to the first point that I wanted to talk about too, even though it's now like the fifth point, which is staying open to friendship and connection in every
Yeah.
job that you take, whatever kind of creative job it is, whether you're an actor showing up on set, whether you're a painter meeting a new client, whether you're an entrepreneur connecting with, a company you're going to do a freelance project for, whatever it is, like really making sure that you are being yourself and being open to personal connection. Because I think we
Hmm.
have this idea that, oh, it's work and I have to be closed and buttoned up and, like a certain
Yeah.
version of ourselves, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think well, I mean, I love this particular topic because I just know for me, like the relationships that I made while being in like entertainment settings and stuff have been what have benefited me the most. So like, just in regards to you and I
Mm-hmm.
still remember like I think we were in the hair and makeup room and I found out that you didn't have like a commercial agent or like you hadn't
Right.
been on like a national commercial audition. And I was just like shook because I would like look at what you look like and I was like, how is she not like out here like in these commercials and doing
I
all
do
these
look like
things and
I'm
stuff?
I'm really I should be really good at cleaning up spills, don't I?
Like yeah, like I was like something like I was like there's so many things and I was just like I felt like like, I was like, Kelsey should be doing stuff. And I was like, obviously you had just moved here. And so I think like having those connections, and for me, I was like, I looked at you and we had been working together a bit at that point, and I was like, I could see like the desire and the hunger and the work ethic. And I was like, and then I found out that you played guitar, and then you sang well, and you danced and all this kind of stuff. And so then there was already a kinship that was being formed there. And like, I'm from North Carolina, you went to school in North Carolina, and we had a mutual friend as well, and so there were just so many things that like kind of bonded us in a way that our other castmates, like I was like, they were really great, but I was like, you and I just kind of like kept going with it. And I was like, I think what was important with that is, despite how everything ended up, it was just like, because I believed in you so much, I was like, I was willing to do whatever you needed or whatever you might have needed help with, to help you push further with whatever it is that you were doing. Because on the reverse side, you were also helping me get further with what I was doing, all the self tapes that we had to do and stuff. Because back in the day, there was no such thing as self tapes.
That's right.
But by the time that you and I got here, that was starting to be the case. And so having to go over to your house and like, because even by the time we met, I still didn't have a lot of friends here either. And so meeting one another on set and forming that sort of bond out, when we finished that show, it was like, you were one of the biggest like aides in helping me with my self tapes and everything like that. And I was like, had I not met you and had we not connected, I was like, I don't know what that would have been. I mean, I'm sure I would have figured it out, but what we know is that because of that connection that we had, we were able to help each other so much, I feel like, for so many years there. So
that's so true. And I also want to piggyback on that and say that it has been and is a wonderful relationship, mutually beneficial outside of work. And like, I am so grateful for, you showing up here today and just, us being able to just call each other after, even if we haven't talked for a few months, and just, it's like no time has passed. And the thing I think that is such a shame sometimes is that, especially, we've sort of been trained in our heads that like, you don't want to shit where you eat, or like, you don't want to get too close to people that you're working with, or like put yourself out there too much or be too vulnerable. And the opposite is true. Like, you want to be vulnerable. You want to open yourself up to these relationships, because yes, it's absolutely true that someone could be a connection that helps you in work years down the line even, but also like personal life, like having somebody who just gets it and can be a support and just show up to hang, who comes to your birthday parties and like knows what's going on behind the scenes for you, is invaluable.
I really feel like because at this point, I guess I've been on quite a few sets, and I was like, I will say that I do think that things do change as far as like that sort of openness and connection, because the more you work, I was like, I think you start to peel back the layers of what you thought this was going to be and what these interactions were going to be like. And when you and I met, I think I was probably a lot more open to people, and I think I still am pretty open, but I think I've been on enough sets and stuff at this point that like, I don't know that I go into it as quickly, like, or I hate to say that I'm not as open, but for lack of a better word, I was like, I'm just a bit more like, if we become friends, great. If not, that's fine too. Like, if you want to talk to me, cool. If not, like, we can just say our lines or whatever. But
I think
by
that
the time
speaks
that you
to
and I met,
exactly. And I think that speaks to the piece of like being who you are and knowing what you need, right? Like being who you are, knowing what you need, having boundaries is great. We love boundaries here on Find Your Magic and in the life of Kelsey Foremost. Love those boundaries. But I guess what I'm saying is like, never totally close yourself off to what may come your way. And if you're showing up to your work, especially if it's creative work, with a sense of play, then the right people are going to be put in your path.
Absolutely. And even if that's temporary, it was like sometimes, friends for a reason, friends for a season, or however you say it.
That again. Like, say that again for the people in the back.
Friends for a reason, friends for a season, and it's important just to like not all relationships like maintain, but I was like, but they're there for a reason for you to like learn from, grow from, gain from. And I was like, I never go into a new relationship thinking like, well, what can I get from this? It was like, it's a
Mm-hmm.
very mutual give and take that's like naturally happening, as opposed to me having a preconceived like idea of
What can
how
this
like I
person do
want to,
for me? Yeah, because that
yeah,
reeks of desperation, and everyone can smell that
reeks,
shit a
and they can see
mile away.
exactly. And so I was like, it's definitely one of those sort of things to where finding those like organic connections and relationships is really important. I was like, I'll just touch on the fact that for me, moving to Los Angeles, I didn't know
It's hard.
anybody either. And so the guy that I ended up connecting with when I first moved here was a friend of mine. Well, we weren't even friends. We were with the same talent agency in North Carolina, and I had only seen him on oh my gosh. Sorry,
You're
did the
good.
connection break
You're
out?
fine.
Oh,
It was your picture, your really adorable headshot for a second, and now it's back.
oh, sorry. I was
All good.
yeah. But
You had the
the
same
thing that I was
agent in
saying is
North Carolina.
right. We have the same agent in North Carolina, and I just reached out to him on Facebook, and I was just like, "Hey, I just moved to LA. Like, I don't really know anybody, and I saw that you were on our agency's roster as somebody who had moved to LA, and he happened to be really nice, and we ended up becoming roommates for like 5 years out here.
Yeah, that was really
Yeah,
brave and awesome. It
yeah.
really worked out.
It really worked out. I really worked out. And that was just like a big testament of just, you know, making connections with people that you like know, and just kind of like reaching out and just seeing, because it was like, what do you have to lose? The worst thing that they can say is no, or just not really want to be, super tight friends. But I was like, I took that chance and reached out to him, and we ended up, to this day, I mean, I just saw him yesterday, and we haven't been roommates for 5 years now up to this
Oh,
point. But we were roommates for the first 5 years I lived in LA, and it was the best like decision that I could have made. So
completely. And talk about too, just, I mean, I know this sounds a little hippie woo woo, but manifesting what you need, like putting yourself out there, saying, like, okay, look, I need a roommate, but then also taking action and then it really working out, like having that
mhm,
bravery to, instead of just staying small and being like, well, I'm not ready to move yet because I don't know anybody, like being like,
yeah,
no, it's scary, but I'm gonna put myself out there and, you know, ask for what I need. And lo and behold, you ended up living together for
yeah,
5 years.
yeah, it's crazy.
I love
Yeah.
that. Well, let's talk for a second, because I love this idea of talking to people who are super successful in a creative field, which you are,
Mm.
about how they find ways to stay excited and creative, um,
Mm.
in ways that aren't necessarily focused on making money. And one
Right.
thing that I'm loving that you're doing is you're kind of get newly into photography. And I'm
Yeah.
loving this like vulnerable exploration and like really interesting aesthetic. And you've always been into photography, but I'm so
Yeah.
glad that you're doing it like for you now. So can you talk about how you sort of arrived at, I want something that is creative, that's an outlet,
Yeah.
but that like you don't put the pressure of making money on it necessarily?
Yeah, totally. Like, so I think so a lot of my friends, I mean, at this point, living in LA, I think everybody has like a pretty nice camera at this point, or even if you just have an iPhone, you know how to use it really well when it comes to
Hmm.
taking photos. And so having friends that already were in photography and stuff, and I had watched them like get a camera for the first time, start taking pictures, and then like years later, it's like, oh my gosh, these pictures are really cool, and like they have such a vibe and such an energy to them. And I, as a creative, like I always kind of geek out when something makes me feel a certain way. And so
Oh,
to think that,
yes,
like, you know what I mean? Like I was
I
like,
do.
so to see a photograph of like a grouping of trees with like a bit of light coming through it, I was like, what a moment! Like, and I was like, and to think that like you saw, like the thing that you were just walking around in the redwoods and you just happened to see this moment and you shot it and you actually captured it in a way that like it gives so much like life and like energy and whatever. I was like, I just kind of geek out about that kind of stuff. So to see them progressing in how good their photography was, it just kind of got me wondering like, could I do this? Like, what
Mm.
do I do? And so me and my friends, like it'll be like 5 of us, and we all would like have a camera, and we would just run around in the middle of the night in LA and just take photos. And I didn't really know how to do much at the time, so like I was always asking questions, and like they let me borrow their
I
camera. I
think
didn't
that's
even.
such an important point, though. You didn't know very much at the beginning, right? But
Yeah,
there was that sense of creativity and play
there
that,
was. Yeah,
that comes through in the art. Sometimes not
yeah.
knowing is actually the best thing for your art.
Well, yeah, I was like, well, because I'll kind of touch on that, because then as I started doing the photography, I got a little bit better, and I started watching a lot of photography videos, asking more questions to my friends, because they had kind of advanced to a point to where like now one of them shoots like all the Weiss watch ads,
Oh,
like
wow.
for their Instagram page. Like he shoots all their stuff. So to think that like years ago he didn't even know how to use a camera, and now like he shoots for a whole company and stuff. I was like, I
Right.
just think that's so cool. And so for me it turned into like, I've always been a bit like body conscious, and like probably have a bit of like dysmorphia with it. And
Mm.
so when I started learning how to use my camera, uh, I initially was taking photos of like my friends and whoever was just like outside and stuff. But the aesthetic and the kind of photos that I really wanted, um, I wanted a certain sort of picture of myself that I was
Mm.
too uncomfortable to like have somebody else take, or for me to pay a lot of money to have somebody take, and for me to like not be happy with the photos. And
Mm.
so I started doing research on like how to do self portraits and stuff during the quarantine. And it just turned into a whole thing to where like I bought a tripod, and now I had, I bought a camera of my own because I was just borrowing my friends' cameras at the time. And it was such an amazing outlet to like see my physical body in a way that like when I look in the mirror, it's like I don't see it the way that it photographs in like
Mhm.
certain lighting. And I'm very like, I like more abstract kind of stuff, and my friends are a bit more commercial with the kind of stuff that they like, which is great. But I was like, I like more moody, like
Mhm.
weird, like angles, and like just odd, more odd, like makes you think kind of stuff a
Art.
bit more. Yeah, and so I was like, I wanted to do that, and I was a bit self conscious, so I just started taking photos inside of my apartment,
I love
during the
that.
quarantine, and like every day I would kind of challenge myself to like watch some more videos, to shoot. And so I would go for these walks outside, and usually around 4 is whenever I had timed the lighting in my
Mhm.
bedroom to be good. And I would
Mhm.
just like set up a chair in my bedroom and put my camera across the room, and I would just shoot myself for like,
Yeah.
an hour or something, just play some music. And it was so fun. And it was like I would do that, and then I would, I downloaded Lightroom, and then at night I would just go on my pictures, and like it was a nice little, like it was like doing an adult puzzle or something, like
Yeah.
every day. But it would be an image of my own that like I shot, that was of me, that made me feel like, wow, this is what I look like in this like way. Or if I ever did a photo shoot with like a big photographer, like I would know how to like pose or something like that.
I
But it
think
was just
it's
such
so
a good outlet
important.
for me.
Yeah, exactly. Such an
Hmm.
outlet. And I didn't know that backstory about the body image dysmorphia, your
Yeah.
words. That makes a lot of sense. And I think it's such an important thing to call out because you do look a certain type of way that if people just saw one of the photos or saw you on Jett with your shirt off, they'd be like, dang, that dude is freaking ripped. They probably would have a hard time believing that.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people like, and I think a lot of people. That's why I don't really like say it a lot. But it was just
Mhm.
like I know to some degree that I have like an issue with like I will take my shirt off and stuff, but there's always a moment of hesitation where I like still think that I'm like the kid that I was whenever I, wasn't
Sure.
looking like this or got picked on and whatever. And so
The body
I think I
knows it
still,
stays in us. It takes a lot of
yeah,
work to unpack those
it
feelings. And
really does. And it was like, but pushing myself to just be comfortable at wherever my body is at that time is important. And so taking those photos, and I'll tell you what the real thing was, Kelsey, is that it was the thought that if I don't if I don't do this now, 70-year-old me is gonna be upset with myself.
Sure.
That whenever I did look this way, I was too self-conscious to actually like allow somebody else to take a picture of me like this, or for me to even shoot myself. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's why I was like, I have to start taking photos, because I want to be able to be an older man. And like, whenever my body is like, not what it looks like now, for me to look back and be like, I did that, like I
Yeah.
worked really hard to look like that. And these pictures are really cool. And this is pictures that I took myself, that I taught myself how to do this, and like, ask the questions to be able to do this. And it has nothing to do with acting,
Right.
like nothing. Like, even if you book a part on the TV show as a photographer, you don't actually have to know how to shoot a photo,
Right. No, but
and so
but that's such an important point of like, first of all, I also want to call out that it's not just about like looking back and saying, oh, I looked like that. It's, I, I got over myself
mhm,
to be able to have this image to look back on, right?
yeah,
Like what I'm
yeah,
getting is that's kind of the core of it, right? Because
yeah,
it's
yeah,
uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to when we feel a certain way about our body to put ourselves literally in the lens, to put ourselves
yeah,
literally under the microscope.
yeah,
Like that's emotional work just as much as
yeah,
physical work. So looking back on it and being like, yeah, I did that. Like I worked on that in my psyche and my
yeah,
mental health as well as my physical body, like very strong, and you should be proud of your body. But it's also like there's such a component of I don't know if pride is the word I'm looking for, but like
I mean, I
confidence.
definitely feel, yeah, like I mean, and it's such a self-confidence builder to know that, like, one, you shot this picture yourself, but two, you're the subject in the photo,
Right.
and I was like, and for it to be something that took me out of acting
And that you
altogether,
can
because I was,
play, right? Because
yeah,
like
like,
it's
it's
you
all
can't
up to
play
me.
and be self-conscious at the same time. It's not
Yeah,
possible. So
yeah,
it's like training your neural pathways
yeah,
to see it as
yeah,
a
it really
pleasurable
is.
experience, right?
Yeah, and I was like, and I make it a whole event. Like I said, I was like, I'll put some music on and stuff, and I'll usually be listening to music while I'm doing it. And like, I'll have my headphones in, and then when I take the picture, I'll like throw them away really fast so I can like, set my pose up or whatever. But and what's funny is like, even though I've started doing this, it's like now I kind of want to step outside of my apartment because I've shot so much
Sure.
inside of it.
Don't we all
But
at
it's
this
like
point?
there's still, but that's like there's still that like bit of nerves and self-conscious like ways of thinking that stop me from like taking my camera outside my apartment and shooting
Mm.
myself in certain like areas, because sometimes I'll see some lighting and I was like, oh, that would be such a cool shot, and I'm just like, oh, I don't know, like
Something to
I was like, what
work
if somebody
towards.
comes in here? Yeah, something to work towards, exactly. And it's like, and I think ultimately it goes back to just like, as an actor, like your self-confidence is so important. So like anything you can do in your like day-to-day life that's like building your self-confidence and building up the strength that you have within yourself, I think is
Mm.
so important. And I think this was an outlet for me that I was just like, yeah, like I am kind of good at it. Like I wouldn't consider myself a photographer, but I was like, I can take a photo. Like I can, like I was like, I can take a moment. You know what I mean? Like I was like, I
You
know how to take a
can.
moment.
Super
Yeah,
talented. I was having
yeah.
a really funny conversation with a friend of mine the other day about hobbies. And I was
Mhm.
like, I really feel like being an actor my entire life, the first 15 years of my professional life were completely centered around like getting the part, right? And
Yeah.
when I was trying to make ends meet, I was painting portraits for money. And I at one point was making scrapbooks for rich women so that they didn't have to for their
Oh
kids.
my gosh.
I charged like $200 per scrapbook and I would put it together for these rich women. It was so
Oh, I did not know
ridiculous.
that.
Oh yes, Kelsey Foremost has had all of like if
Yo,
there was a creative side hustle to be had, I did it. I promise you.
absolutely. Now that much I've known. Yeah.
So it was a conversation I was having where I was like, I don't know that I've ever done a creative activity just for fun, like
Yes.
not to start an Etsy shop or,
Yeah.
whatever. And the other day, literally just not even 2 weeks ago, I got my paints out of storage. I haven't touched them in 6 or 7 years.
Oh wow.
And I know, right? Because it wasn't making me money and I put them
Yeah.
away. and I took them back out and I put on some music.
Yes.
And my art teacher had passed away recently. And so I was like, what can I do to honor him? And I just was like, you know what? I'm going to paint something. I have no idea what, for no other reason than to honor this man who gave me such a gift, but also just because I feel like it, because I feel like playing and I feel like being creative, and I'm not going to sell this, and I'm not going to worry about where it's going to go in the house. I'm just going to make it to make it.
Yeah.
And it was hard at first to like let go of that part of my brain and not judge it as I'm making it, and being like, the experience of making it was what mattered. And now I'm all about like, what can I do? What?
Yeah. Well, it's like, and that's what I love about like doing something that, like, we're not trying to get paid for it. We're not trying to do anything, because I think pursuing a career as an actor takes so much like mental and emotional like focus,
Yes.
and like stability, and like the financial aspect of acting is really hard because you don't get paid, you know,
Feast
regularly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I was like, you put so much work into something that isn't paying you at all until it is paying you, and even then it was like that amount of money can't make up for how much
You got to
you
stretch
spent.
it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you really got to stretch it. And so finding things that like take you away from that you still really enjoy. And I was like, because the photos that I take, I was like, I have zero intention of ever shooting like other people for any reason. Like I was like, I literally only pull my camera out to take pictures of myself. Like I was like, I was like, and I do it because during the quarantine, it made me realize like so many things. But one of the things is just like, think about older gentry and the things that you won't be able to do just because of like ailments or, you know, physical things, like whatever might happen, we don't know. But just think about, what is it that you wish that what is it that version of you will say, like, man, I wish I would have done this when I was like younger. I wish I would have done this when I was younger, and start doing it, thinking ahead
Gentry,
and
I
do
love
those
that
things
so much.
And so that's how the photography thing came out, because I was just like, I know that I want to shoot my physical body looking the way that it does, because I'm really proud of how hard I work to look the way that I do. And I was like, but I'm so uncomfortable to pay like hundreds of dollars to somebody that like, I might get 2 photos that I kind of like or whatever.
And
like,
again,
I
that's
don't.
not the core of why you want to do it, right?
Yeah, like I was like, I want to do it because I was like, it's like my thing.
Right.
You know, like all of it, like from start to finish, like picking up the camera, setting up the angle, like editing the photo, like everything I do to it, like everything I do to it was all mine. And like, I didn't have to ask anybody else about anything. I didn't have to show anybody if I didn't like it or
You
whatever.
are your
like,
own damn work of art.
Yeah. So like I will say, like having photography, and like I also just started baking like last year as well, and I got really good at it.
Oh my God, I love this. Okay, you guys,
Yeah.
Gentry and I share a very funny obsession with British culture. And
Oh
immediately
my
I just
gosh.
went to Great British Baking Show, and
I
I
bet
just
you
got really
did.
mad that I can't submit you.
Oh my gosh, I'm not that good. I'm like I was like, I have like maybe 2 things that I'm like pretty, I would say,
But tell me, I
semi.
mean, you have to have binged that show like crazy, right?
No, I know I've watched some of it, but like they're so good that it feels like out of my realm of possibility.
Oh
You're
my God.
good. Like
No,
I
no,
remember
no.
whenever no, I was just talking about you whenever we
Oh no.
I forgot who I was talking to, whenever we went to like Greg's apartment and we
Yes,
watched
to
that episode of
celebrate you
Turn.
getting Turn, Washington Spies.
Yeah. And I was like, there's a picture of the 2 of us because you made like a vegan, like
Okay.
red, white, and blue cake.
Asterisk pause. Okay. The real story behind this cake, you guys. The real story behind this cake.
I think I remember this too, guys.
This is so embarrassing. Okay, here's the real story behind this cake. So Gentry it was like his big, would you consider it your big break?
That was my first like big episode of television ever. Yeah.
It was so brilliant. You really should go back and watch it. Turn Washington Spies. And what season were you for?
Season 2, episode 7. If you're gonna,
okay,
if you're gonna watch.
I get confused.
Yeah.
Season 2, episode 7. Great. We'll go with that.
Yeah.
And he plays Billy Lee, who in real life was George Washington's slave. I mean, do we
Yeah,
call him his
yeah.
slave? Was
I think he bought him when he was like 17, and he was pretty much George Washington's like right hand man, kind of like, his child in a sense, I guess. But
wow.
you know,
He bought him when
yeah.
Washington was 17 or when Billy was 17?
When Billy was 17, so George Washington wasn't even the president yet
Yeah.
whenever Billy Lee came into the picture. And like he kind of was, his aide, like he was always there. I mean, he was just
He's an
essentially just a slave.
amazing,
Yeah.
yeah,
He
an
just, the
amazing
character itself
figure.
is really, yeah, like there definitely should be more about like who he was and the closeness that he was in the vicinities of like these, country leaders at
He
that time.
absolutely deserves to be talked about with all of the founding fathers. And we're going to get to that in a second. But briefly, this freaking cake. So it's Gentry's big break. We are having a viewing party. We're watching it live on
Yeah.
television. Remember when we watched things live on television?
Yeah.
And we went to our manager's house. So nice. He invited like a group of us over, and I was going to bring this American flag brownie cake. It was vegan, and like everybody was into being all health conscious, whatever. So I go and I get all the ingredients and I full on make this cake. And when I tell you guys it stank to high heavens, I'm like, is it because it's vegan? Like, what on earth? This cake does not smell appetizing. I've got to test it before I put the frosting on. And I tested it and I almost threw up. And I was like, I'm never cooking vegan again. And then I look at all the ingredients and I realized I had used garlic oil
Yep.
instead of normal coconut oil to make
Yeah.
the cake. And I literally, it's just a shocker. I didn't just vomit everywhere. It was the most embarrassing thing. And thank God I
Oh my
caught it
gosh.
before I was just like, it'll be fine. And like brought it to the party, like garlic chocolate
Imagine.
cake. Oh,
Imagine.
but no, I remade it. It was a hit. I made an American flag out of blueberries and strawberries. We have
It
a
was
photo
great. I was like, I
to
still have that photo. Yeah, out there, picture somewhere. I was like, I
Pixar. It
definitely
didn't
have it.
happen. But
Yeah.
I don't want to gloss over Billy Lee because that actually is a great segue into something that I'm so grateful you're being generous enough to talk about today, which is representation of Black Americans in entertainment
Mm,
and in pop culture and in the media.
yeah.
And I distinctly remember like learning about Billy Lee through that part.
Yeah.
And as a ignorant white woman, learning that for the first time and thinking, why doesn't everybody know who Billy Lee is? And it's such a micro example of a moment when representation truly did matter and
Mm-hmm.
education truly did matter.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are open to it, I would love for you to share any thoughts that you might have
Yeah.
on that subject.
Yeah. What's so funny is like at the time, I remember how much I wanted to be like, I mean, Turn was years ago at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember moving to LA and it felt like in order to be like considered like a real like quality black actor, you had to have played a slave,
Yes.
because like everything that like everything that we had to do, for a young actor, like you were probably going to play a slave at some point because there were so many slave things coming out,
And it was one of the
and
only categories in which you saw yourself represented.
yeah, and so it was just like you're thinking like, oh yeah, like I could play a slave, and like I remember I used to say like I could outslave anybody in LA because I was from the South.
Wow.
I remember thinking that like I was like, oh yeah, I could do it, and so to get that part, it was really cool. But I think the reason why I really was happy to get that particular role is because Billy Lee wasn't a like regular run of the mill slave. Like he got to be very well dressed, and he got to be in those spaces with like George Washington, and he was the General Washington at the time we were doing the show and stuff. And I mean, looking back at it, it was like I was so happy to do it. And then it was like after the fact, anytime there was a slave in a show, like I was always getting an audition for it, and I
Mm.
started to pass on them because I was like, I don't want to play a slave anymore. Like I don't like how this feels, and I'm actually quite tired of like these being the stories that if you're going to have more than two black people in this project, it's a slave movie all of a sudden, or like a
Yeah.
Tyler Perry movie. And it was just like, I don't know why there's only like we're only allowed to have like one, maybe two Black people in the project that like isn't all Black cast or something. And those sort of thoughts started coming into my mind. And so I started passing altogether on most slave auditions after that point. And I'm so grateful to have done Turn and everything, but
I'm
I
sure it
do
wasn't
feel like
easy to pass on auditions, because that's something
it,
that I don't want to
yeah.
gloss over. It's hard to say no to
Oh, it's
something.
so hard. Oh my gosh. It's like, I mean, to this day, even the fact that I've like done enough work to where I can pass on stuff and everything will be okay. Like I'm
Sure.
not in jeopardy of like being dropped from my like representation or anything. It still is hard because you're like, am I like passing up on an opportunity that would like, move my career, move the needle or whatever. But at the end of the day, like, I mean, I know you know me well enough to know that it was like how I feel morally in this world is bigger than acting to me.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, I don't care what this role is or who is in it. I was like, these are just people to me. This is just a job or whatever, because I need to go to bed feeling like good about the work that I've done and the shows that I'm agreeing to be a part of and the characters I'm agreeing to portray. And so I was like, even if I only played villains the rest of my life and stuff or whatever, I was like, as long as it's a story that I like respect, then I'm okay with that, And so at that time, Turn was something that I was super here for and everything. But post Turn, I was like, my feelings changed and I felt like I did what I needed to do as far as playing a slave. And that doesn't mean that I wouldn't play a slave again. It's all a
It
matter
has
of
to be the
like,
right story.
has to be the right story. And so, because I was like, me as like a Black man in Hollywood, it was like my physical body is so much more than just like this thing that like I'm just an actor or whatever. I was like, you're not going to use this body and this image to tell a story that who the person is in this body doesn't agree with, just for the sake of like, oh, I need a job or I need money or whatever. I was like, I don't need anything. I don't need anything to make me compromise like my moral standings on what I believe personally to be what I want to do in this world. And so, I was like, I'll pass on stuff simply because I was like, I don't agree with this story. I'm just ready for Black people to be like mystical fairies and like, wear amulets and like disappear into like thin
Garrett
air and
Jacks,
show up.
baby.
Like, yeah, like I was like, I just want to be mystical, magical. Like, I don't want to like I'm so tired of American stories that are really rooted in racism and hate amongst races of people. I was like, I know that there's plenty of stories that still need to be told, but unless you're going to tell those stories in a way that is refreshing in a way we haven't seen, then just let it go. I was just like, until I get to be a magical like dwarf in something or whatever, then
Brother of Dragons.
I
Remember,
want to be the
I
brother
still
of
want to do
dragons.
Brother of
Yeah.
Dragons, man. We had this idea of doing a web series way back when Game of Thrones was very much like at its height, and we were going to do Brother of Dragons.
Yes.
I don't know what it even was.
I don't know what the concept was. I just know I wanted to say like the brother of dragons at the end of everything. Like I was hashtagging it on pictures and stuff. Like I loved it. And I was
I'm
like,
here
that's
for
the thing
it.
is like I love that kind of stuff. And like I feel like the way that my mind works is like it lends itself to like fantasy and mysticism and stuff. And like the sort of stories that I find really interesting have to deal with that as well. And so I was like, if somebody was to ask me like, what would your ideal role be or something like that, I was like, if I could play a villain in a fantasy movie,
oh my
like
gosh, dream.
if I could be Maleficent of some kind or whatever, or if I could be, I always say like I wanted to be a mix of like if Poison Ivy and like there's a show called Power that Omari Hardwick stars in, but it was like if I could be a mix of Poison Ivy and Omari Hardwick in Power, if they had like if they were one person, like that's the kind of like villain I would want to play.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Gentry, thank you so much for coming on here and talking to me about all the things.
We can keep going. We can keep going.
I know we could. We'll have to do a part 2 follow-up. But for now, tell the people how to support you, where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Gentry White. And Jett is now on HBOMax. You can watch Unreal on Hulu. You can watch Turn on
Unreal.
Netflix.
Oh my
And
God.
Shannara
One of my
Chronicles on
favorites that you've
Netflix
ever done.
too.
That was so fun. That show was such a
Yeah.
guilty pleasure. And now that it's Bachelorette
Oh,
season again, it's a
right.
good watch.
Yeah. Yeah, that one's real. That one was a lot of fun. And I have another show coming out called Leopard Skin that
Mm,
will hopefully be out at the end of the year, maybe early next year. They're in post-production now, so
exciting.
we will see.
Very exciting. Oh, this is great.
Yeah, yeah.
Gentry, thank you again, and everybody for tuning into this episode of Find Your Magic. I'm Kelsey Foremost. Be sure to give this podcast a like, a subscribe, a follow. Good reviews mean so much. It helps us get discovered by more viewers like you. So definitely
Yes.
leave us a little review, a little like, and we really appreciate it. And we will see you next time. If you made it to the end of this episode, it means you're truly committed to inviting more magic into your life. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to Find Your Magic on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this stuff. Each review truly means so much. Thanks for being here. Now go out there and find your magic.